Hey everyone, in this video I'll be breaking down what each status condition does in Palworld's 1.0 update and best synergies to use alongside them. Now, there are 9 different conditions in the game with only one of them that you can stack on top of others, and I'll break down all of that in this video. We even got a new PAL in the 1.0 update that allows us to apply things like poison on our attacks here, which is a massive boost to our damage. For a brief overview of the different status conditions, we have Freeze here from Frostallion. We also have Blind, which comes from Frostallion Knocked or Venusa. We also have the Electrify from Snock, Ivy Covered from Needle Knocked, the Freeze, which is capable from also Elgrove Chris when you combine it with Soak, which Soak comes from Ophidia here. We also have Renjishi here, which can apply Burn, and Serpentera, which can apply Muddy. I also want to recommend the Dandylord here, new PAL that was added, which can make your players' attacks do poison damage, and poison can stack with any of these other conditions, leading some crazy damage over times if you combine it with like fire, for example. Or we can also do like a blindness focus build because poison is typically associated with dark type pals, as there is no poison type in this game. But there's a lot of pals that'll combine with these, like for example this one will increase your catch rate of ivy covered pals, or this one here will increase the damage dealt against targets that are muddy. Now I'm going to first break down Blind, because I consider it to be one of the best in my opinion here, because you can get it from Frostallion Knocked, who's one of the best mounts in the game, but on top of that you can also throw Venusa in your party here, which will make it so that you apply it with any of your attacks. So you can either ride Frostallion and get a Blind 6 applied to the enemies at max condense, or you can just have Venusa apply it no matter where you're using your party. Like if you want to fly on Eidrelon and apply the Blind, you can do this. Blind special effect is pretty cool because it makes the target not able to see you. So it will reduce the luck of hitting you with its attacks. So you're going to notice when you apply Blind onto a target, they're sometimes just going to end up missing your character altogether. And from my experience, I found that the Blind actually does a pretty solid job. Targets will end up throwing their attacks above you oftentimes, which makes it a very capable ability because you can use this for a bit of extra survivability, but the way that it combos is most important. Because of pals like Rouge, which is added here, you can increase the damage dealt to blind targets by 65%. This is pretty impactful because this is on a full dark team. Darkness is the best type, I would say, in Palworld because of things like this. Blind makes it easy to prevent damage from your team, but that's not all. Venusa, being a dark type, has access to some very strong attacks with their exclusive skill Poison Scatter here being able to poison the target, but they also have Poison Fog, which is a guaranteed poison. Now this is a good combination to kind of segue together because with the blindness you're going to give it an increase to your damage, but you can also run Venusa, who applies your gun will apply blind, and then Venusa can apply poison on the target, and this combines together because poison can stack with others. This allows you to take advantage of Prickster's ability, which increases damage against poison targets by 65%, stacking with Rouge's, and we also have the very powerful Bakemi, which will make it so that poison targets reduce their damage by 80%. Poison is a damage over time, but it does stack with every other condition in the game, giving you some pretty crazy options. So if you want to do blind and poison together, Venusa is the best choice. You can also run with Dandylord here and have a Venusa in your party because Dandylord's skill will make your gun apply poison as well. So you can have him out as your main partner and have that apply. And then with that, you're going to be increasing the damage dealt to targets by a whopping 130% here. And then also Bakemi makes it so you take 80% less damage. This becomes crazy when you consider the Immortality passive skill, which gives 5% lifesteal. When you're taking 80% less damage and you're dishing out quite a bit because of those damage boosts from poison and blind, you can basically become invincible, and that makes Venusa like an immortal style build. I do have a separate video on that if you want to check it out in the pinned comments. But yeah, anyone can apply poison. It's just these two are the best at it, and both of them are dark types. So if you want to pair with Eidrelon, who gets buffed by dark types, you got a full working team here. But the best combination would be to have these two, Prickster as well to increase the damage, Bakemi to reduce the damage you take, Rouge there, and then you can throw in Solan for 80% more player damage. So when you're blinding targets, you're hitting hard too. So many great builds with these two. And a quick note about this is dark type pals are immune to the blind effect, but nobody is immune to poison. So pretty cool stuff. Next, we're going to move on to Burn, which is very similar to Poison as it does damage over time. This makes it difficult if you're using things like the Pal Tamer glasses or if you're using the Ring of Mercy because the Burn will take them out if you left that one hit point. But applying Burn can be pretty beneficial because it's another damage over time. Fire type pals cannot be afflicted with Burn, but you can have a pretty cool Burn team going because you can also throw in Yarmantide Ignis here, which will increase increase the damage dealt to burn targets by 65%. He's already strong on his own, but being able to further increase your damage is pretty crazy. There's a lot of pals that interact with burns, though. We also have Magix here, who is a pretty cool pal. Whenever the player attacks an enemy afflicted with burn, it creates flames around itself, dealing continuous damage equal to 30% of the player's attack damage to enemies that come in contact with it. Magix can also trigger that ability themselves. Being a dark and fire type, one of the better types in the game due to the massive 3 type matchups, this is a strong combination. But in all honesty, burn ends up being one of the weaker options because the other ones just bring a lot more value. Whenever a target is burned, they take half less grass damage, so that can be a big impact. Also, we do have the Flarackle here, which has an ability to also combine with burn. It'll make the target explode, dealing damage equal to 60% of the player's attack damage. Now, this has a cooldown. If you're using like a drone launcher, that can steal your damage. This happens commonly in games like this, where sometimes some very powerful options do interact with things, unfortunately. But one of my favorite pals from the new update, Dupin here, also gets an impact from burning. So when the player's health goes below 50%, Dupin generates an explosion around the player, firepower 200, burn build up 777. Additionally, when the player's health is below 50%, the player's attacks increase by 50%. This becomes crazy because Dupin is a super cool pal, but its benefits with burn aren't really there because you don't want to go below 50% health, but if you have a bunch of Dupins, it can do some pretty crazy damage. So yeah, burn honestly is not that good for a fire build, and I'll explain why here now. Because we have pals like Needle Knocked. Now, Ivy Covered is an interesting condition because it makes fire type deal double damage. That is obviously way better than a damage over time because you can hit heavy with your fire attacks. Ivy Covered will also reduce the target's movement speed, and on top of that, it makes it so they can't use any abilities that require stamina. This becomes pretty crazy because Ivy Covered is boosting up some of the most powerful pals in the game, like Eidrillon Ignis, who is very powerful, and Noclim Ignis, who is insanely powerful, but you can further pair this up with things like Needle, so you can have both Needos on your team here, increasing damage to Ivy Covered pals by 65%. And remember, when you increase that damage, you're also getting a double damage because if you use fire type, it's going to be doubled. And there's a lot of pals like Ragnahawk, Chillid Ignis that can turn your damage type into fire, even Wixen, who can turn your damage to fire and give 50% boost, which is again getting doubled on that. So you can do some pretty crazy stuff. Not only that, but we also have Sylvance here, which is a really cool pal. Whenever the player attacks anyone with Ivy Covered, it'll explode them, doing 60% of the player's attack damage. Again, that does end up having an impact if you're using the drone launcher, but if you got the mechanical bow, that hits hard. So yeah, that is really good because you can pair Sylvance with it. You can throw on both of the Needles and do some insane damage with a fire setup, running things like if you wanted to run with a Wixen or Ragnahawk setup, dealing fire damage with your gun, doubling the damage and increase it by 65%, and then doing explosions with it. This is a really good condition because it debuffs the enemy. Grass types are immune to it, but yeah, they just get scorched down really quickly. And as mentioned at the start of the video, Fleeing will make it easier for you to catch pals that have Ivy Covered. So if you want to go for a full catching team, that'd be the way to do it. Now, next up is Electrify. This comes from Snock here. Now, what Electrify does is it's going to make them like kind of paralyzed for a short period of time. So it kind of is like a stun. Now, this also has a benefit of doubling water damage. So if you go for a full water team, you can do some pretty crazy stuff, like running with Azarope here and turning your damage type into water. Or if you're running with Neptilius, he can do some pretty crazy damage if you buff it up by using Snock. But we also have Slowwatt here, so whenever the player attacks an enemy afflicted with Electrify, the enemy discharges electricity, dealing damage equal to 60% of the player's attack damage. So again, another powerful way to combine this together, but this is more so for a water style team. You can use Snock to buff up the water damage that you're dealing, making it an interesting one. However, there are two types that are actually immune to this, electric types and ground types, so they can't actually get hit with Electrify, unfortunately. But if you want to run an electric build, there are none better than running Ophidia, because Soaked is on the opposite end of things. Soaked basically makes it so that the targets are slowed down, kind of like Ivy Covered, but it makes electric type damage deal double damage, which is pretty insane. And also it'll make it so that fire damage does half the amount of damage. Water types are immune to being soaked, but water types will just naturally take double damage from electric, so same thing with the Ivy Covered. But we also have regular Yormantide, similar to Yormantide Ignis, who buffs burn. This burns up. I heard this 65% increase to our damage against soaked targets. Massive, because Yormantide is a really good pal. Now, this is where things get crazy because we got Hell Zephyr Lux, which does electric damage, which increases your attack. We got Beacon, who also does the same but gets a movement speed buff. And we also have Prickster Lux, similar to Wixen, which will change your attack type to electric and increase your attack by 50%. So you can go crazy with an electric style build because you can turn your damage into electric, make everyone weak to electric type damage, further boost up the damage, make explosions around it. Actually, no, that's Electrified, wrong one. But Elgrove Chris will actually freeze targets that are afflicted with stroke with one strike. This becomes a pretty crazy setup because if you want to go for a freeze, this is just a guaranteed way to do it. This takes us to our next condition, freeze, which in my opinion is one of the better ones in the game because when you freeze a target, they're immobile. You can also get this from Frostallion, one of the best pals in the game, changing your attack type to ice, inflicting freeze 6, and increasing your attack by 40%. So you can freeze targets by using Frostallion, you can freeze them by using the Ophidia Elgrove Christ, and the little sack of eggs Muffly here will actually make it so that you can catch frozen pals easier. Although I'd probably prefer going with the Ivy covered there. Freeze is a very powerful condition just because it takes the enemy out of combat for a moment, so you can pair this really well with like Frostallion. And it is really satisfying to get a freeze off on a target. So yeah, very satisfying there. Unfortunately, we're doing so much damage that we're just taking them out immediately, but the frost buildup of 6 is pretty nice, especially against any of the bosses in this game that, you know, have a lot more health there. So yeah, you're not likely to do it if you're at max level here, but against any of the bosses, you have a better chance. Now, Muddy is a weird one. This is the weakest, in my opinion, feature. Muddy just makes it so the target moves a little bit slower and takes half damage from electric. So it's not really that good because there's others like Ivy covered, which just give you a huge boost to fire damage. This doesn't even have that. You basically just slow the target down a little bit. And there's only one buff that you can get, Pyrdon here, which will increase the damage dealt to Muddy targets by 65%. So you could build around it here. This doesn't change your attack types of ground, just changes it so that you apply Muddy while it's in your priority there. So yeah. To do that, you must take an Anubis in your party to change it to a ground type and increase the attack by 50%, but you're not really incentivized to because ground is good against electric types, but yeah, you can do many other things against them. Ivy covered and use a fire type attack, for example, just sends it better. So yeah, this is a different one because I don't really find it being super effective. That's why I covered it last here. It's just a little bit weaker. And I guess the last condition in the game is technically stun, but this is an interesting one. While it's in the party, players take 80% less damage from explosive attacks and are immune to stun, but the player is always immune to stun. Stun only comes from like a specific few attacks, like if you're using the Pen King's Emperor slide, or a rocket launcher, for example. You'll see the stars flying around the target, but it doesn't affect the player, so yeah, this is a little weird. I wish Hadrodron was a little bit better. Maybe they'll update him in the future, but yeah, that is all the different statuses in Palworld's 1.0 update. So just want to break those down. I was asked a few times to go over something like this. So my thoughts are the strongest is using the soaked combination with an electric team, or using the blind and poison setup, or the Ivy covered and fire damage. So either doubling the damage on fire or electric type attacks, or applying the blind poison combo just to destroy targets with a dark theme team. Conditions are very powerful, but let me know your favorites in the comments below and hit the subscribe button if this video is useful. Hope you have a great day. We'll catch you in the next one.